The officiant's voice was calm when he asked if anyone wanted to speak. I remember the way the question landed in the room, not like a question at all, but like a stone dropped into still water, and everyone just watched the ripples move. Nobody answered. The handful of people we'd invited sat in 2 short rows of folding chairs that the venue had set up along the edge of the garden. 12 people. Maybe 14. My husband Colton's mother was in the front row on his side, pressing a folded tissue against the corner of her eye. His college roommate sat next to her. On my side, Colton's aunt, who'd driven up from Stockton because she liked me better than she liked most people in her own family. 2 of my co-workers. My grandmother's oldest friend Vivian, who was 81 years old and had taken a rideshare from her assisted living facility in Elk Grove because she said wild horses couldn't keep her away from this. My parents were not there. My sister was not there. The officiant waited a few more seconds, long enough to be respectful, not so long that it became uncomfortable, and then he smiled and moved forward, and we finished the ceremony in the Sacramento Courthouse garden on a Thursday afternoon in October, with the valley oaks just beginning to turn and the air carrying the first real edge of autumn cold. When it was over, I took the marriage certificate from the small table where it had been placed after we signed it. I folded it once along its center crease carefully so nothing smudged. I put it in my bag. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. 8 months earlier, I was living in a rental house in the Midtown neighborhood of Sacramento, 2 blocks from a coffee shop I'd been going to for 6 years, in a city I had chosen specifically because it was far enough from my parents' house in Folsom to require intention to visit, but close enough that absence couldn't be read as abandonment. That was always the math with my family. Close enough to be present. Far enough to breathe. My name is Presley Vance, and I was 34 years old when my father made his first serious mistake. The second one came later. But the first one was the one that started everything. Colton and I had been together for 4 years when he proposed, which surprised neither of us and surprised everyone in my family, apparently because when I called my mother the evening it happened she said, "Oh," and then nothing for a moment, and then asked if I'd told Bo yet. Bo is my sister. She's 3 years younger than me and has always occupied more square footage in my parents' attention than I ever managed to, through no particular effort on her part that I could identify. It wasn't her fault. She was just the one they watched. I told my mother I had wanted to call her first, that I hadn't told anyone yet. She said that was nice and asked what the ring looked like. The planning started in February. We had set the date for October, a Thursday, which was unconventional, but the courthouse garden was cheaper on weekdays and we weren't interested in spending $30,000 on a single afternoon. Colton worked in urban planning for the city. I was a project coordinator for an architectural firm downtown. We were practical people. We had student loans and a savings account and a retirement fund that was growing slowly but growing, and we wanted to get married and then go to the coast for a long weekend and come home and start the rest of our life without a debt we'd spend the next 3 years paying off. My mother thought this was reasonable. She said she'd always liked Colton's steadiness. My father said we were being short-sighted and that a real wedding made an impression. I asked what kind of impression it was supposed to make and on whom, and he said that was exactly the kind of question that was going to make things harder than they needed to be. That was February. By March, the impression my wedding was supposed to make had become mostly beside the point, because Bo had announced that she was throwing a birthday party. Bo turned 31 in September. She'd been planning a party for roughly 2 years at that point. This was an open family fact. A party that would involve renting out a rooftop venue in downtown Sacramento, a catered dinner for 40 people, a DJ, a photo booth, specialty cocktails, and a custom floral installation that a friend of hers built as a side business. The party had evolved over the 2 years of its planning from a casual gathering to something that now had a budget line and a seating chart. I want to be fair about this. Bo's parties were always an occasion. She had a gift for making people feel like they'd been given something, like showing up was itself a small inheritance. I genuinely liked the parties she threw. I'd been to most of them. What I hadn't accounted for was that her party would land on the same weekend as my wedding. Not the same day, the party was Saturday the 14th and the courthouse ceremony was Thursday the 12th. But the weekend. Same weekend in the same city, and the family was already driving up from Folsom, and some of Bo's extended guest list was overlapping with people my parents would want at the post-ceremony dinner we'd planned for Friday night. I found out about the conflict in May, when my mother called to ask if Colton and I could consider moving the ceremony to November. I thought at first I'd misunderstood. I asked her to say it again. Just a few weeks, she said. It would simplify things. The venue is booked, I said. We paid the deposit in February. Deposits can be refunded sometimes. This one isn't refundable. There was a pause. Not a long one. I'm sure Colton would understand, she said. I remember the way my jaw tightened. I didn't say anything for a moment, and in that moment I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, patient, certain, as though she were waiting for a slow machine to process a simple instruction. I'm going to pretend you didn't ask me that, I said. She said that was fine, that she was just passing along a thought, that nobody was trying to pressure me. She passed along 3 more thoughts over the following 6 weeks. My father called once, a single specific call in late June, and that was the call that mattered. It was a Sunday evening. Colton was out running. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the wedding binder I'd been keeping since March, printed confirmations, the vendor contact list, the timeline, the seating diagram for Friday's dinner, a copy of the courthouse reservation. I had a mug of tea and the window was open and the neighbor's jacaranda was dropping purple blossoms across the sidewalk in the low June light. My father called at 7:12. I know the time because I just checked my phone to see if Colton had texted that he was on his way back. Presley, he said, the way he always started, my name first like a filing system, establishing my location before he proceeded. I want to talk to you about the timing issue. There isn't a timing issue, I said. The date is set. The deposit is paid. The officiant is confirmed. I understand that, he said. But your mother and I have been thinking about it, and we feel like we're in an impossible position. I waited. I didn't fill the silence. Beau's party is that weekend, he said. Saturday. And your dinner is Friday. And the ceremony is Thursday. And we're stretched thin, Presley. It's a lot of events. We can't be in 2 places at once. The ceremony is 2 hours, I said. Thursday afternoon. The dinner is Friday evening. Beau's party is Saturday. There's no overlap. There's the driving, he said. The hotel. Your mother's back has been bothering her and she doesn't want to do a full weekend of events. Then she doesn't have to come to all of them, I said. My voice stayed even. I was aware of how careful I was being, how precisely I was managing the temperature of each word. She can skip the dinner. I'd understand. We wouldn't want to skip the dinner, he said, and something shifted in his voice then, just slightly, a tightening I recognized from childhood, from conversations that were about to stop being conversations. What we'd like is for you to give us a little flexibility. I'm not moving the date, I said. He was quiet for a moment. We've been putting money away, he said. For years. For this. Your mother wanted to offer you something toward the wedding and we were going to do that, but Presley, I need you to understand that if you insist on keeping this date, that makes things very complicated for us. I remember exactly how the room felt when he said that. The open window. The jacaranda. The tea cooling in my hand. What does that mean? I said. It means we need some cooperation, he said. This is a family. It should feel like a family decision. Beau's been planning her party for 2 years. You picked a date without thinking about what was already on the calendar. I picked a date in February, I said. I called Mom the same week. Beau's party wasn't in September, in February. The party's been in the works for 2 years, he said again, as if repetition made it a fact that superseded other facts. The venue booking was finalized in April, I said. I know because Beau texted me about it. The line went quiet again. I could feel him recalibrating. I just need you to think about what you're asking of your family, he said. His voice had dropped into a register I associated with his most serious pronouncements, low and measured, the voice he used when he wanted to sound final. We can't be everywhere. And if you won't help us solve this, then we have to make choices. Make whatever choices you need to make, I said. Presley. I love you, Dad, I said. But I'm not moving the date. He said he understood. He said that was my decision. He said he hoped I'd reconsider. He hung up 3 minutes later, and I sat at the kitchen table for a while after that, not moving, the wedding binder open in front of me, the jacaranda still dropping its blossoms outside. When Colton came back from his run, he found me still at the table. He read the room immediately, he was good at that, and he poured himself a glass of water and sat down across from me and asked what happened. I told him. All of it. I kept my voice flat, not because I felt flat, but because if I changed the register even slightly I wasn't sure what I'd say. Colton listened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished he was quiet for a moment and then said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to get married on October 12th, I said. "Then that's what we're doing," he said. July was quiet in the way that precedes weather. My mother sent 3 texts across the month, careful texts friendly in tone, asking about the florist, asking if we'd settled on the dinner menu, asking if there was anything she could do to help. I answered all 3 because the alternative was a silence that would be read as aggression, and I wasn't ready to be aggressive. I was still hoping, in the way you hope for things you know are already lost, that something would shift. My father didn't call again after the June call. He didn't text. He sent a birthday card in late July because my birthday was the 28th, and he signed it, "Love, Dad," and wrote one line in his careful block print underneath, "Thinking of you." I put the card on the refrigerator. I didn't know why. Habit, maybe. August arrived and the Sacramento heat bore down on the city in the flat, serious way it does in late summer. Not dramatic, just relentless, a heat that made everything feel slightly slower and more deliberate than it needed to be. I was finalizing the guest list, which had never grown beyond 18 people on the outside, and which had contracted in the past month. Colton's side held firm. His mother, his roommate, 2 cousins, an aunt, a childhood friend who was flying in from Portland. 7 people, all confirmed, all enthusiastic in the specific way of people who were genuinely happy for him and held no complicated feelings about the occasion. My side was harder. 2 coworkers confirmed early and stayed confirmed. Vivian, my grandmother's friend, the one from Elk Grove, called me on a Tuesday morning to tell me she'd already arranged her ride and she'd be wearing the blue dress she'd bought for my grandmother's funeral because it was the nicest thing she owned and she believed in using nice things on significant occasions. I had to put the phone down for a moment after that call. My mother RSVP'd in mid-August. Tentatively. My father didn't RSVP at all. Bo called me once on a Sunday in late August and the call lasted 11 minutes. She was warm and sisterly and said she was sorry about all of it, that it wasn't her intention for the party to create complications, that she hoped I knew she was happy for me. I believed most of it. I told her I did. "Are Mom and Dad coming?" she asked near the end. "I don't know," I said. A pause. "I'll talk to them," she said. "You don't need to," I said. "It's fine." She said she'd talk to them anyway. Whatever she said didn't change anything. The week before the wedding, my mother called. It was Wednesday evening, 6 days out. Colton was in the other room, going over the restaurant reservation for the Friday dinner, making sure the table was set for the right number. "I have to tell you something," my mother said. I was standing at the kitchen counter. I set down the glass I was holding. "We're not going to make it," she said. "Thursday. The ceremony. We talked about it and it's just a very complicated weekend, Presley. Dad's back is bothering him now too, and with the drive and the hotel." "You don't have to explain," I said. "We'll be there for Bo's party Saturday," she said. "We already committed. And we hoped you'd understand. You know how much we—" "Mom," I said. My voice was steady. I heard it from a strange distance how steady it was. "I understand. We love you," she said. "We're so happy for you and Colton. We want to celebrate with you. We were thinking after everything settles down, maybe in November." "Sure," I said. "Presley." "I have to go," I said. "We're finalizing some things." I hung up and stood at the counter for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed. I was aware of my hands on the edge of the counter, the way I was gripping it, and I made a deliberate effort to loosen my fingers. Colton appeared in the doorway. I looked at him. "They're not coming," I said. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and put his arms around me, and I stood there and let him, and I kept my eyes open because I had decided a long time ago, in a specific and private part of myself, that I was not going to cry about my father's choices. That resolution had a long history and a specific origin, but I kept it as I had kept it before. The wedding was Thursday. The room held the right people. The officiant asked if anyone wanted to speak and the room was quiet, and then it wasn't because Vivian, 81 years old in her blue dress, raised her hand and said she'd like to say something. She stood up slowly and said that my grandmother would have been so proud. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence and she sat back down and pressed her lips together. The officiant smiled. We finished the ceremony. I folded the marriage certificate along its crease. I put it in my bag. We had dinner Friday at the restaurant, 9 people, and it was louder than I'd expected and easier than I'd expected, and Colton's mother made a toast that made his college roommate laugh so hard he spilled his wine, and I sat at the center of it and felt, for stretches of that evening, genuinely warm. Saturday, Beau's party happened across the city. My parents were there. I know because Beau posted a photo at 11:30 that night. My mother in a silver top, my father with his arm around Beau, all of them glowing in the pink light of the floral installation. I saw it Sunday morning. I put my phone face down on the nightstand. 8 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in June, my phone lit up with my father's name. I almost didn't open it. I was at my desk at the firm, in the middle of a punch list review for a project in East Sacramento, and my phone was buzzing with the particular persistence of a message rather than a call, and when I turned it over and saw his name I held it for a moment before I unlocked the screen. Presley. Hope you're well. I think it would be good for us to reconnect. There are some things about the family property situation I should have explained a long time ago. It concerns the Folsom house. Call me when you can or I can come to you. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down on my desk, face up this time, and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The Folsom house. I had grown up in that house. It was a 4-bedroom craftsman on a corner lot in the older part of Folsom, on a street that had gone from modest to valuable over the 20 years my parents had lived there. The neighborhood had filled in around them, coffee shops, a wine bar, a weekend farmer's market 2 blocks away. The house itself was worth something now. Considerably more than it had been when they bought it. I knew this because 2 years ago, during a brief and now strange period when my father had seemed interested in having a real conversation about the future, he had mentioned the house in passing, had said something about an arrangement he'd been thinking through, something that involved the property, something he thought I should know about eventually. He'd never followed up on it. I had forgotten about it. I picked up my phone and read the message a 3rd time. There are some things about the family property situation I should have explained a long time ago. Outside the window of the firm, a delivery truck was idling at the corner. The afternoon light was falling flat and gold across the rooftops. My stomach tightened, not from fear exactly, but from something adjacent to it, something that carried the same low frequency. I set the phone face down again and went back to the punch list. I didn't call him back that afternoon. Or that evening. Or the next morning. But the message stayed with me the way certain things do, not loudly, not insistently, but with the particular patience of something that already knows you'll have to deal with it eventually. On Thursday I called my grandmother's estate attorney. Not for any specific reason. Just to say hello, I told myself. But I wrote down the number before I dialed it, and I kept the piece of paper afterward. Part 1 word count, approximately 2,950. I've caught an issue before finalizing. The draft above runs approximately 2,950 words, well below the 4,200 word floor. Per the delivery rule, I must extend via real scene content, not padding or reflection. I'm continuing part 1 now with an additional escalation beat and sensory material to reach the required floor. The estate attorney's name was Gerald Fitch. He'd handled my grandmother Lorraine's affairs when she died 4 years ago. A small estate, mostly sentimental in value, but he'd been meticulous about it and I'd trusted him on instinct, which was how I trusted most people. He was in his late 60s, practiced out of a small office near the Tower District, and he answered the phone himself, which I'd always found quietly reassuring about him. "Presley," he said. "It's been a while." "It has," I said. "I'm sorry to call out of the blue." "Don't be," he said. "Is something going on?" I thought about how to answer that. I was sitting on the back steps of the rental house. The firm had let me leave early, a slow Thursday, with a glass of water and the late afternoon sun slanting through the neighbor's fence in long golden strips. Colton was still at work. "My father reached out," I said. "He mentioned the family property. The house in Folsom. He said there were things he should have explained a long time ago." Fitch didn't say anything immediately. I noticed the pause. "When you say property situation," he said slowly, "do you have any sense of what he might mean specifically? Ownership structure? Title?" "I don't know," I said. He didn't say anything specific. Just he said it concerned the house and that he should have explained it to me a long time ago. Another pause. Shorter this time. "Presley," he said. I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me if it's none of my business. Did your grandmother ever talk to you specifically about the Folsom house? Before she died? I felt something change in the air. The way the light was falling through the fence, the sound of the neighbor's sprinklers clicking on 2 yards over, the weight of the glass of water in my hand, all of it went very slightly sharper. She mentioned it once, I said. A long time ago. When I think I was in my mid-20s. She said something about wanting to make sure things were handled right. I didn't understand what she meant at the time. I thought she was talking about her own estate. He said. Gerald, I said. What do you know? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, he was careful, the particular carefulness of a man who knew exactly what he wanted to say and was measuring how much of it was his to say. I think, he said, that you should have a conversation with your father before you draw any conclusions. But I also think, if it would make you feel better, that you might want to take a look at your grandmother's files before that conversation. The ones I sent you after the estate was settled. Do you still have those? I did. I had a manila envelope in the filing cabinet in the spare room, the one Colton had turned into a home office. I'd put it there when it arrived and hadn't opened it since because the estate had been simple and everything Fitch had walked me through at the time had seemed straightforward, a few small bank accounts, some jewelry, a collection of books. Nothing that required my continued attention. I have them, I said. Look through them before you call your father back, he said. That's all I'll say. Look through them. Okay, I said. Anne Presley? He said. Yes. If after you look through them you have questions, real questions about what things mean or what your options are, call me back. I'll make time. I thanked him and hung up and sat on the back steps for a while longer. The sprinklers clicked off. A mockingbird in the oak 3 doors down ran through its catalog, car alarm, flute phrase, something mechanical, flute phrase again. The sun was going down behind the roofline. I went inside and went to the spare room. The filing cabinet was a 2-drawer gray metal unit that Colton had bought secondhand when he converted the room. My files were in the bottom drawer. Tax returns, rental agreements, the insurance folder, a section for medical records, and at the back, in its original manila envelope with Fitch's return address in the upper left corner, the folder labeled Estate of Lorraine Vance, Final Distribution Materials. I pulled it out and carried it to the kitchen table. I sat down. I didn't open it immediately. I sat with it for a moment, aware of a specific reluctance I couldn't quite name, something that wasn't quite fear but was adjacent to it in the way the thing I'd felt reading my father's text was adjacent to fear. Not the thing itself. Just something nearby in the same family of feelings. Then I opened the envelope. The first documents were what I remembered: the bank account summary, the small investment account, the distribution letter Fitch had sent confirming that the jewelry and books had been transferred to me as the named beneficiary. I had 2 of her rings in a box in the bedroom. I'd worn one of them to the wedding. I set those pages aside. Underneath them was a letter I didn't remember. It was on Fitch's letterhead, dated about 6 weeks after the estate closed. I had no memory of receiving it, which meant either that it had arrived during the period after my grandmother died when I had been operating on minimal functioning, the months when everything had a slightly dreamlike quality, or that it had been placed in this envelope when Fitch sent the final materials and I'd filed the whole thing without reading it thoroughly. Both were possible. Neither was an excuse I was proud of. The letter was 4 paragraphs. The first 2 were procedural, confirmation of distribution, final accounting, the standard closing language. The third paragraph was 4 sentences, and I read them 3 times before I understood what they said. Per your grandmother's wishes, the following matter is noted for your records. A deed restriction and beneficial interest notation were filed on the Folsom property at the time of your grandparents' original purchase in 1971. This notation has remained attached to the title and conveys a conditional beneficial interest to the eldest grandchild upon the death of both original owners. Your grandfather predeceased Lorraine by 11 years. As of the date of Lorraine's passing, both original owners are now deceased. You are the eldest grandchild. The 4th paragraph said, this matter may require further action depending on current title status. Please feel free to contact this office with any questions. I set the letter down on the table. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, bass rattling slightly through its windows, and then the sound faded and there was nothing. I read the 3rd paragraph again. Conditional beneficial interest. Eldest grandchild. Both original owners now deceased. I looked up from the letter. The room was the same room it had been 5 minutes ago, same table, same window, same late evening light going gray at the edges. Colton's jacket was on the chair across from me. A coffee mug I'd rinsed that morning was upside down in the drying rack. The same room. I picked up my phone and looked at my father's text again. There are some things about the family property situation I should have explained a long time ago. It concerns the Folsom house. My voice, when I eventually spoke, to no one, to the empty kitchen, just to hear what words sounded like out loud, was quiet and very level. "I'll bet it does," I said. I put the letter back in the envelope. I put the envelope on the corner of the table where I'd see it in the morning. Then I picked up my phone and found Gerald Fitch in my recent calls and looked at his number for a long time without dialing it. I had questions. Real questions. I knew that now. But it was Thursday evening and the number would be there in the morning, and whatever my father had been sitting on for, apparently for years or longer, it had survived this long without my knowing about it. One more night wasn't going to change what was in that letter. I set the phone down. I didn't call my father back. Friday morning came in the way Sacramento Octobers sometimes do, cool and clear, the light arriving at a low angle that made everything look slightly more considered than it was, edges sharpened, shadows long. I was up before Colton, which wasn't unusual. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the neighbor's jacaranda, which had dropped most of its blossoms by now and was going to bare branches in the early autumn chill. The manila envelope was still on the corner of the table where I'd left it. I had slept, which surprised me. I'd expected to lie awake turning the third paragraph of Fitch's letter over in my mind. Conditional beneficial interest, eldest grandchild, both original owners now deceased. But somewhere around 11 I had gone under and stayed there until the alarm, and I woke up with the particular clarity of someone who has let their brain process something overnight without supervision. I poured my coffee. I sat down at the table. I pulled the envelope toward me and took the letter out again and read the third paragraph one more time, in the morning light, to make sure I'd read it correctly the night before. I had. I put the letter down and picked up my phone and called Gerald Fitch at 8:47, knowing his office opened at 8:30. He answered on the second ring. "I read the letter," I said. "I thought you might," he said. "How are you feeling?" "I don't know yet," I said. "Tell me what it means. Specifically." He took a breath, not a stalling breath, more like a man organizing a careful answer. "What it means in the simplest terms," he said, "is that when your grandparents purchased the Folsom property in 1971, they filed a deed restriction with a beneficial interest clause. The clause names the eldest grandchild as a conditional beneficiary, conditional on the deaths of both original owners. Your grandfather died in 2013. Your grandmother died 4 years ago. As of the moment your grandmother died, the condition was met. So I have an interest in the property," I said. "You have a documented claim to a beneficial interest," he said. "Which is not exactly the same thing, but it's not nothing. The size and nature of that interest, what percentage, whether it's a partial ownership stake or a right of first refusal or something else, depends on the exact language of the original filing, which I don't have in front of me because it's a county record, not something your grandmother's estate generated. I sent you that letter as a flag. I should have followed up more aggressively to make sure you understood what it was flagging." "Why didn't you?" I asked. A pause. "Honestly? I wasn't sure your father didn't already know. I assumed incorrectly, it seems, that it was a family matter being handled internally." I looked at the ceiling for a moment. "He texted me this week," I said. "He said there are things about the family property situation he should have explained a long time ago." "Well," Fitch said very quietly. "Yeah," I said. We were both silent for a moment. Outside, a leaf blower started up somewhere down the street. "What do I need to do?" I said. "First," he said, "I'd like to pull the county records on the property, the original deed, anything filed against the title since 1971. I can have someone do that today. Second, I'd strongly recommend you don't call your father back until we know what we're actually looking at. You'll want to know what's on that title before you have that conversation." "How long will the records take?" "A day," he said. "Maybe 2. County recorder's office is usually fast with this kind of pull." "Do it," I said. "I'll call you as soon as I have something," he said. I thanked him and hung up and sat at the table for a while longer. the coffee going slightly cool in my hand, the envelope in front of me. Colton came out at 9 already dressed, and I handed him the letter without saying anything. He read it standing at the counter. When he finished, he looked at me. "Okay," he said. "Yeah," I said. "What are you going to do?" "Wait," I said. "And not call my father back yet?" Colton nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment, holding the letter, and I could see him making the same calculations I'd been making: the wedding, the text, the 4 years since my grandmother had died, the fact that my father had said I should have explained this a long time ago, as though explanation were the only thing that had been withheld. "How long has he known?" Colton asked. "That's what I want to find out," I said. The day passed the way waiting days do, slowly and in pieces. I went to work. I sat through a project coordination meeting and took notes and answered 2 emails and approved a materials order for the East Sacramento project and did everything that needed to be done with the surface layer of my attention, while the deeper layer turned the 3rd paragraph of Fitch's letter over and over like a stone. Conditional beneficial interest. Eldest grandchild. I was my grandmother's only grandchild for the first 3 years of my life. Beau came along when I was 3. The clause had been filed in 1971, 22 years before I was born, written in the language of a hypothetical future that had since become a specific and present fact. I tried, on the drive home that evening, to remember if my grandmother had ever said anything to me directly, anything I might have half heard and filed as old-person vagueness rather than specific intent. She had been, in her later years, a woman who spoke obliquely about important things. She'd grown up in a family where you didn't say the real thing directly, you circled it, touched its edges, hoped the person you were talking to was paying attention. She had said something once. I hadn't thought about it in years. It was the summer I was 26. I'd come back to Sacramento after 2 years in Portland. A job had ended, a relationship had ended around the same time, and I'd returned with the specific humility of someone who had tried a version of their life and found it didn't fit yet. I was staying with my parents for 6 weeks while I found an apartment, working a temporary administrative job at an architecture firm that would eventually become the permanent job I still had. My grandmother was living independently then, in a small house in Carmichael she'd owned since my grandfather died. I visited her every Sunday. She made tea and we sat on her screened porch and she asked me about Portland and I told her the true version, not the edited version I gave my parents, but the real one, and she listened the way she always listened, which was completely, without any visible desire to fix anything. One Sunday in July she got up in the middle of our conversation and went inside. I heard her in the back of the house, the spare room I thought, or the bedroom, and she was gone for maybe 4 minutes. When she came back she was carrying a manila envelope, smaller than the one Fitch would eventually send me, with her own handwriting on the front in her precise, slanted print. She set it on the table between us. "I want you to know this exists," she said. I looked at it. My name was on the front, just Presley, no last name in her handwriting. "What is it?" I asked. "Something your grandfather and I set up a long time ago," she said. "When we bought the house. We wanted to make sure things went the right way eventually." "The Folsom house?" I said. She said, which with her meant yes. "Grandma," I said, "the house belongs to Mom and Dad." "We sold them the house," she said. "We sold it to your father at a price that was generous. Because he was family and because we loved your mother and because that's what you do. But generous isn't the same as unconditional." She touched the edge of the envelope with 2 fingers, not picking it up, just touching it. "This explains the condition." I looked at the envelope. I remember the weight of the afternoon around that conversation, the heat, the sound of the sprinklers in her neighbor's yard, a dog barking twice and then going quiet. The screen porch smelled like her, lavender and old wood and the specific scent of her hand lotion. "Grandma," I said, "should I take this?" "Not yet," she said. "I'm still here. This stays with me while I'm here. But I wanted you to know it exists, and I wanted you to know what it means, and I wanted you to hear it from me rather than from a letter after I'm gone." She paused. "Your father is a man who believes that what he holds in his hands belongs to him permanently," she said. "I want you to know that some things have conditions attached." I didn't fully understand what she was telling me. I was 26 and I had other things on my mind, and the conversation had the quality of something important being said in a language I didn't quite speak yet. I thanked her. We finished our tea. I went home. My grandfather's name was on the deed alongside hers. He'd been gone 3 years by then. After she died, when Fitch sent the estate materials, I had filed the envelope in the drawer and not opened it because I had truly believed, that it was a copy of the same materials Fitch had sent, that whatever she'd had in the spare room had made its way into the official record and been handled, and that handled meant resolved. It had not meant resolved. What it had meant, I was beginning to understand, was pending. Fitch called Saturday morning. I was in the spare room, Colton's home office, at the filing cabinet, which I'd opened again not to look for anything specific but out of a compulsion to be near the drawer that had held the envelope, as though proximity to the object would help me think. I'd pulled out every file in the drawer and laid them on the desk in a row, reading the labels. Tax returns. Rental agreement. Insurance. The estate envelope. And one more thing I'd found behind the estate envelope, in the back of the drawer where things accumulated when there was nowhere specific to put them, a thin folder, unlabeled, that I must have put there at some point and then forgotten. I was holding it when my phone rang. "I have the county records," Fitch said. "Tell me," I said. "The original deed was filed in December 1971. Your grandparents are listed as co-owners. There is a recorded restriction attached to the deed from the same date, a beneficial interest clause, naming the eldest grandchild of both parties as a conditional beneficiary. It's there. It's on record. It's been on the title this entire time." "Okay," I said. "Here's the part you need to know," he said. "Your parents purchased the property from your grandparents in 1998. The deed transfer recorded at that time does not include any notation of the restriction." I went still. "What does that mean?" "It means either the restriction was formally released at the time of transfer, which would require your grandparents' signatures on a separate document, which I don't see recorded, or the transfer was recorded in a way that didn't properly carry the restriction forward." He paused. "Or someone recorded the transfer in a way that obscured the restriction." "Can you tell which?" I said. "That's what I'm still looking at," he said. "I want to see the 1998 transfer documents themselves, not just the recording summary. I've requested them. It'll take another day." "And the restriction," I said. "If it was never properly released, what does that mean for the current title?" "It means," Fitch said carefully, "that the restriction may still be legally operative, which would mean your claim is still attached to the property. Which would mean," he stopped. "Which would mean that if my father is planning to sell the house," I said, "or transfer it or do anything with the title, he would need to resolve your interest first," Fitch said. "Yes." I sat down on the edge of the desk. The unlabeled folder was still in my hand. I'd forgotten I was holding it. "Fitch," I said, "when did my grandmother die?" "April," he said. 4 years ago April." "And my father texted me this week," I said. 8 months after my wedding, which he didn't attend. 4 years after my grandmother died." A silence. "Presley," Fitch said, "is there anything else in those estate materials I sent you? Anything you haven't looked at closely?" I looked down at the unlabeled folder in my hand. "I'm not sure," I said. "Look through everything," he said. "Everything. Call me Monday." After I hung up, I sat on the edge of the desk for a moment. Then I opened the unlabeled folder. Inside was a single piece of paper, not a legal document, not a letter on any firm's letterhead. It was a handwritten note on plain white paper in my grandmother's slanted print, the same handwriting that had been on the small manila envelope on her porch that summer afternoon. At the top she had written, "For Presley, in case I forget to tell you directly." I read it slowly. The morning light came through the spare room window at a low angle and lay across the desk in a wide stripe. Somewhere outside, Colton was in the backyard. I could hear him faintly doing something with the garden hose, a sound that was entirely ordinary and entirely separate from what I was reading. The note was 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph repeated in plainer language what Fitch's letter had described: the restriction, the condition, the fact that my grandfather and she had set it up deliberately and with intention, that it was not an accident or an oversight, that they had paid an attorney in 1971 to make it as clear and durable as they knew how. The second paragraph was 7 sentences. The first 6 described, in her careful oblique way, the fact that she had mentioned the restriction to my father at the time of the 1998 sale. That she had assumed he understood it. That she had assumed he would, in time, explain it to me himself. That she had not wanted to create conflict in the family by pressing the point. That she had trusted him. The 7th sentence was the one I read 3 times. If you are reading this and no one has explained it to you, then he didn't. I set the note down on the desk. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. The garden hose went quiet outside. A mockingbird, or possibly the same mockingbird from 3 doors down that I'd heard Thursday evening, running its catalog, made a sound like a car door locking twice in quick succession and then went silent. I picked up my phone. My father's text was still there on the screen. There are some things about the family property situation I should have explained a long time ago. I set the phone face down on the desk. Then I did something that I had not planned to do, had not thought I would do, had not done in 4 years. I reached back into the filing cabinet drawer all the way to the back, behind where the estate envelope had been, where there was nothing left now that I'd pulled everything out, or almost nothing. My hand touched paper. I reached in further and took it out. It was an envelope. Small, the size of a greeting card. My grandmother's handwriting on the front. My name. No return address. No stamp. It had been sealed and then, at some point, opened. The flap was not glued shut but folded in, the way you fold an envelope closed when you don't mean to seal it permanently. I did not know how it had gotten into my filing cabinet. I had not put it there. I was certain of that with the specific certainty of someone who has just realized the shape of something they hadn't yet seen clearly. I held it without opening it. Outside, Colton came in through the back door. I heard his footsteps in the kitchen, the sound of the tap running briefly, the refrigerator opening and closing. "Press?" he called. "In here," I said. My voice was level. "Come." He appeared in the doorway of the spare room. He looked at me, at the desk covered in files, at the note in one hand and the small envelope in the other. "What happened?" he said. "I'm not sure yet," I said. "Come look at this." The envelope was from my grandmother. I knew that before I opened it. The handwriting was hers, the same careful slant, the same pressure on the downstrokes that I'd been reading since I was a child learning what her cursive looked like. What I didn't know was how it had gotten into the back of my filing cabinet, behind the estate envelope, in a drawer I had not emptied since I moved into this house 3 years ago. Colton came and stood beside me. He read the outside of the envelope, just my name, nothing else, and didn't say anything, which was the right thing to do. I unfolded the flap and reached in and took out what was inside. 2 things. The first was a single index card with 4 lines of my grandmother's writing, a name, an address, a phone number, and a date. The name was not Fitch's. The address was in Folsom. The date written at the bottom was March of the year my grandmother died, which meant she had written this approximately 6 weeks before she passed. The second thing was a photograph. Small, printed on plain paper the way you printed things at home when you didn't want to go to a shop, slightly low resolution, the colors a little flat. It showed a document. A legal document of some kind, the text too small to read in the photograph but the format recognizable, a deed. Or something that looked like a deed. At the top I could make out the county seal and a case number and a date, 1998. I looked at the photograph for a long time. "She photographed it," Colton said. "She photographed it," I said. I set both items on the desk beside the handwritten note and looked at the 3 of them together, the note, the index card, the photograph, and felt something settle into place in my chest. Not relief. Not anger. Something more like recognition, the feeling of understanding that an event you thought was random had in fact been structured, that someone had planned for this moment specifically and had trusted that you would eventually find your way to it. My grandmother had been 83 when she died. She had been sharp until the end. She had known exactly what she was doing. "She knew he wouldn't tell me," I said. Colton didn't answer because there wasn't anything to answer. I called the number on the index card Monday morning. The name written above it was an attorney named Dale Whitmore, and the address was in the older part of Folsom, about 6 blocks from the house I'd grown up in. He answered after 2 rings, and when I gave him my name he said, without any preliminary, "I was wondering when you'd call." He had been my grandmother's attorney before Fitch, her original attorney, the one who had handled the 1971 deed and the restriction and several other matters across the intervening decades. He was 81 years old and still practicing, he told me, though selectively. My grandmother had contacted him in the last months of her life specifically to make sure that if I ever came looking, he would have the original documents. She was concerned, he said, that certain things might be managed in ways that didn't serve your interest. "How long have you been waiting?" I said. "She passed in April," he said. "So 4 years and some months." He didn't say this with any particular weight, just as a fact. She told me you might take a while. She said you had a habit of trusting people longer than you should. I didn't say anything to that. I have the original restriction document from 1971, he said. I have a copy of the 1998 deed transfer, which your grandmother obtained independently at the time and brought to me, because she was concerned about how it had been recorded. And I have a letter she wrote to me in March of the year she died, confirming her wishes regarding what should happen with these materials. What did she want to happen? I said. She wanted you to have everything you're owed, he said. And she wanted it done right so that no one could argue with it. I arranged to meet him Wednesday. Tuesday my father called. I was at work in the middle of reviewing a set of revised floor plans for the East Sacramento project when my phone lit up on the corner of my desk. I looked at it for 2 full rings. Then I answered. Presley, he said. I haven't heard back from you. I know, I said. I've been thinking about what you said. I'd really like to sit down with you, he said. In person. There's a lot to explain and I don't want to do it over the phone. Okay, I said. Come Saturday. A brief pause. Saturday works, he said. I can be there by 10. Fine, I said. Come at 10. I hung up and went back to the floor plans. That evening I told Colton. Do you want me there? He asked. Yes, I said. But in the other room. I want to hear what he says before he knows how much I know. Colton nodded. He didn't argue with the logic because the logic was sound. Wednesday I met Dale Whitmore. His office was exactly what you'd expect of a man who had been practicing law in the same building for 50 years. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a desk the size of a small boat, the smell of old paper and coffee and something that might have been pipe smoke from decades past. He was a small man, compact and deliberate in his movements, with white hair cut very close and the kind of eyes that took in everything and gave back only what was necessary. He shook my hand and gestured to the chair across from his desk and sat down himself and opened a file that was already waiting on the desk in front of him. I've been holding this for 4 years, he said. I'd like to walk you through it carefully so you understand every piece. He reached into the file and took out the first document. It was the original 1971 deed restriction, 3 pages, typed on a typewriter, the paper gone the pale yellow of old documents but the text still clear. He laid it flat on the desk and turned it toward me. I leaned forward and read the relevant section, which he indicated with 1 finger. A conditional beneficial interest in the property herein described is hereby conveyed to the eldest surviving grandchild of both parties upon the death of the surviving grantor. That's the clause, he said. Plain language. No ambiguity. And it's been on the title since 1971, I said. Recorded at the county, he said. Yes. He reached back into the file and took out the second document. This one was the 1998 deed transfer, the one that had recorded my grandparents' sale of the property to my parents. He laid it beside the first document and pointed to the section where restrictions and encumbrances were listed. The section was blank. The restriction wasn't carried forward, I said. It was not listed, he said. Whether that was an oversight or an intentional omission, I can't say with certainty. What I can tell you is that your grandmother noticed it within 2 weeks of the transfer recording. She came to me with a copy. She was not happy. What did you advise her? I said. I advised her that the omission didn't extinguish the restriction, he said. A recorded restriction doesn't disappear because a subsequent deed fails to list it. It's still on the title. It's still operative. Anyone doing a proper title search would find it. But my father might not know that, I said. Whitmore looked at me with a specific patience. Your father, he said, is a man who bought a house from his in-laws and hired a real estate attorney to handle the transaction. Whether that attorney explained the existing restriction to him at the time, I don't know. What I know is that your grandmother raised the matter with him directly, approximately 3 months after the transfer recorded. I went still. She told him? She told him there was a restriction on the property, he said. She told him it named the eldest grandchild. She told him it was still operative regardless of the transfer recording. She told me about this conversation afterward and she wrote it down. He reached into the file a 3rd time and took out a handwritten letter, 2 pages, my grandmother's handwriting, dated September 1998. This is her account of the conversation. I took the letter and read it. It took me several minutes. When I finished, I set it down carefully on the desk beside the other documents. He knew, I said. He knew, Whitmore said, as of September 1998. Yes. Saturday arrived the way difficult days always do, too quickly and with too much ordinary texture around them, sunlight and coffee smell and the sound of the neighbor's dog, all of it proceeding as though the day were not the specific kind of day it was. My father arrived at 10:04. I heard his car in the street, heard the door, heard his footsteps on the front walk. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee. The manila envelope, Fitch's envelope, was in the spare room. I had not left anything on the table. I let him knock. I opened the door and he was standing on the porch in the way he always stood, squared up, hands at his sides, the physical posture of a man who considered his own presence to be a form of argument. He was 63, still fit in the careful way of men who watch themselves, gray at the temples now in a way that had happened gradually and then all at once. He was wearing a collared shirt and khakis and he looked, as he usually looked, like a man who had already decided how the conversation was going to go. "Presley," he said. "Come in," I said. He came in and I closed the door and he looked around the kitchen and living room the way he always did when he came to our house, not rudely, not conspicuously, but with the slight survey of someone cataloging. "Is Colton here?" he asked. "He's home," I said. "Coffee?" "Sure," he said. I poured him a mug and set it on the table and sat down. He sat across from me. We were quiet for a moment in the way of people who are deciding who goes first. He went first. "I want to start by saying that your mother and I know we let you down," he said. "With the wedding. That's not why I'm here, but I want to say it." "Okay," I said. "We should have been there," he said. "It wasn't right." I didn't fill the silence that followed. He picked up the coffee mug and set it down without drinking from it. "The reason I wanted to talk to you," he said, "is the house. The Folsom house. Your mother and I have been thinking about next steps. We're not as young as we used to be, and it makes sense to start thinking about the property, what happens with it, how things get structured." "What kind of next steps?" I said. "We're looking at selling," he said. "The market is good right now. The neighborhood has come up considerably. We'd be looking at a significant return." He paused. "I wanted to tell you directly and I wanted to talk to you about how we handle the proceeds. As a family. How were you thinking about handling them?" I said. He leaned back slightly. "Your mother and I thought it made sense to divide a portion of the proceeds between you and Beau equally, as a kind of a recognition going back. A gift." "A gift," I said. "Yes," he said. "We thought that was the fair way to do it." "How much are you listing it for?" I said. "We've had a preliminary appraisal," he said. The number came in around 2.1 million. I kept my face level. I picked up my coffee mug and held it. "And what portion were you thinking of dividing between me and Beau?" I said. "We were thinking in the range of 50,000, he said. "Each. So 100 total. That leaves us with." "Dad," I said. He stopped. "I need to ask you something," I said. "And I need you to answer me honestly." He looked at me with the expression of a man who was recalibrating, not panicked, not guilty-looking, but watchful. "Of course," he said. "Did Grandma Lorraine tell you in 1998 that there was a restriction on the deed to the Folsom house?" The recalibration stopped. His face didn't change in any dramatic way, it didn't collapse or flush or harden into anger. It just went very slightly still, the way a face goes when a man is deciding what he already knows he cannot convincingly deny. "Where did you hear that?" he said. "Did she tell you?" I said. "Presley. It's a yes or no question," I said. My voice was steady. I was aware of it, how steady it was, and I kept it there deliberately. He put both hands flat on the table, a gesture I'd seen my whole life, his version of calling a meeting to order. "What your grandmother set up in 1971 was not something she ever fully thought through," he said. "It was a different time. Estate planning was less sophisticated. The language in that document, I had an attorney look at it, and the opinion I got was that it was ambiguous. Unenforceable." "Whose attorney?" I said. "Mine," he said. "Did you get a second opinion?" I said. A pause. "The matter was settled to my satisfaction," he said. "To your satisfaction," I said. "Yes," he said. His voice had dropped into that low final register, the one I'd heard on the phone in June 8 years ago, the one that meant he believed he was closing something. Presley, I'm here because I want to do right by you. I'm offering you $50,000. That's not nothing. That's a significant gesture. It's a significant gesture, I said. It is, he said. And I think if you're reasonable about this, you'll see that it's fair. The restriction names the eldest grandchild, I said. I'm the eldest grandchild. Grandma told you about it in 1998. That's 26 years ago. I found the documents this week, Dad. The originals. I found her letter describing the conversation she had with you. Something moved across his face then, fast and then gone. He pressed his lips together once. Those documents, he said, are not what you think they are. Then tell me what they are, I said. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, the low register was still there, but something else had entered it, not quite contempt, but in the same neighborhood. You're going to do what you're going to do, he said. I can see that. But I want you to think very carefully about what you're starting here. This is a family. Whatever you think you found, the moment you turn it into a legal matter, you lose that. You understand what I'm saying? You walk this back right now, we move forward, everyone comes out fine. You push this, you don't get what you think you're going to get, and you lose everything else in the process. I looked at him across the table. Everything else, I said. That's right, he said. Think about your mother. Think about Bo. Think about what this does to all of us. He leaned forward just slightly, and his voice carried the particular weight of a man who believed he was offering something final. You were always the one who made things harder than they needed to be, Presley. Even as a kid. You'd dig in on a thing and make everyone miserable, and at the end of it you'd get exactly what you would have gotten if you'd just been reasonable from the start. Walk away from this. Take the $50,000. We move on. The kitchen was quiet. Colton's footsteps were not audible from the other room. The refrigerator hummed. I looked at my father and I let every word he'd just said sit in the air between us without rushing to cover it. You were always the one who made things harder than they needed to be. I noted it. The exact words. I would remember them. I need you to leave now, I said. He blinked. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected argument, or capitulation, or tears. He hadn't expected a sentence that short with a tone that calm. Presley. I'll be in touch, I said. Through my attorney. He stood up slowly. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said it again, the same words with the same weight, as though repetition would make them land differently. You were always the one who made things harder than they needed to be. He walked to the door. I didn't move from the table. I heard him open it, heard the pause on the threshold, heard the specific quality of silence that precedes a final thing being said. He said it quietly, almost to himself, and then he was gone. Walk away from this, Presley. Take what's offered and walk away. The door closed, and the house was quiet. I sat at the kitchen table for a moment, not long, maybe 30 seconds, and then Colton came out of the spare room. He'd heard everything. The walls of the rental were not thick and he'd been on the other side of one of them, and I had not lowered my voice. He came to the table and sat down in the chair my father had just vacated and looked at me. You okay? He said. Yes, I said. And I was, which surprised me slightly. Not numb, not suppressed, but actually steady, in the way you are steady when a thing you've been bracing for finally arrives and turns out to weigh exactly what you thought it would weigh. No more. No less. Call Fitch for me, I said. Tell him Saturday happened and I need to see him Monday. Colton pulled out his phone. I got up and went to the spare room. The file from Whitmore's office was in a large envelope he'd given me Wednesday, containing copies of everything: the 1971 restriction, the 1998 transfer deed, my grandmother's letter. I'd put the envelope on the desk in the spare room when I got home that afternoon and hadn't opened it again since, waiting for Saturday to be over first. Saturday was over. I reached into the desk drawer where I'd placed the envelope and took it out. I set it on the desk and opened the flap and reached in and took out the documents one by one, laying them in a row the way Whitmore had laid them on his desk. The restriction first, then the transfer deed, then my grandmother's letter. I unfolded the restriction slowly, the old paper stiff at the creases, and laid it flat beside the transfer deed so I could see both at once. 2 documents. Side by side. The restriction plain as language could make it, the transfer deed with its blank encumbrance section where the restriction should have been carried forward and wasn't. I looked at them for a long time. Then I took out the photograph, the one my grandmother had printed and put in the small envelope in the back of my filing cabinet. Low resolution, the county seal just legible at the top, the case number visible if you knew what you were looking at. She had photographed the 1998 deed herself. She had printed it and sealed it in an envelope and put my name on it, and somehow, through what channel I still didn't fully understand, it had ended up in my filing cabinet. I thought about that for a moment. The most likely answer was Fitch. She had given it to him with the estate materials, he had included it in the envelope he sent me, and I had filed the envelope without reading it carefully. It didn't matter now. What mattered was that she had taken the photograph at all, that in 1998, 26 years ago, she had looked at the transfer deed, seen what was missing, and made a copy. She had known then. She had known, and she had documented it, and she had waited. I stacked the documents in order, tapped the edges even, and slid them back into Whitmore's envelope. Then I reached back into the desk drawer, the same drawer further back, and took out the small envelope with my grandmother's handwriting, the one that had held the index card and the photograph. I turned it over in my hands. Empty now. But I kept it. Monday morning I was in Fitch's office by 9. He'd cleared the first hour of his day. His assistant brought coffee and closed the door, and Fitch sat across from me with a legal pad and listened while I walked him through everything: Whitmore, the original documents, my grandmother's letter describing the 1998 conversation with my father, Saturday's meeting, my father's offer, his exit. When I finished, Fitch was quiet for a moment, writing something on the legal pad. "Walk away from this," he said. That's what he said. "Twice," I said. Verbatim twice. And then once more at the door. Fitch set down his pen. "Presley, I want to be straightforward with you about where this stands. The restriction is recorded. It's on the title. Your father's attorney, whoever told him it was ambiguous or unenforceable, gave him an opinion I don't agree with, and I suspect any court would not agree with either. The language is clear. You are the eldest grandchild. Both original owners are deceased. The condition is met." "So what does that mean in practice?" I said. "It means," he said, "that if he proceeds with a sale of the property, and based on what you've described, he is actively planning to proceed, he cannot convey clear title without resolving your interest. Any competent title company will find the 1971 restriction in a search. If they don't and the sale closes with it unresolved, you may have grounds for a claim against the proceeds even after the fact." "What's my interest worth?" I said. He picked up his pen again. "That depends on how the restriction is interpreted, whether it conveys a percentage ownership or a right of first refusal or a lien equivalent interest. At a sale price of $2.1 million, he paused. "Do you have any documentation of the appraisal figure he mentioned?" "Only his word," I said. "We'll pull the county assessor's records and any recent comparable sales," he said. "But at that number, even a modest percentage interest is a significant sum. A 1/3 beneficial interest, for example, would be $700,000. The number sat in the room for a moment. "Is 1/3 reasonable?" I said. "The restriction language says eldest grandchild, not a specified fraction," he said. "We'd need to argue for an interpretation. But there's precedent for beneficial interest clauses of this type being construed as a meaningful share, not a token amount." He paused. "I want to bring in a real property specialist. Someone who works specifically with deed restrictions and title disputes. I have a colleague, her name is Sandra Reyes, she's in Sacramento, she's handled half a dozen cases like this. I'd like her to look at Whitmore's documents." "Do it," I said. "There's one more thing," he said. He hesitated, which was unusual for him. "Your father said he had an attorney look at the restriction and received an opinion that it was unenforceable. If he relied on that opinion in good faith, his position isn't as simple as outright concealment. However," he stopped again. "However," I said. "Your grandmother's letter says she told him directly," he said. "In 1998. Before any attorney was involved. She told him the restriction existed and named you. If he knew before he sought the opinion, if he went looking for an opinion specifically to find a way around something he already knew was there, that changes the character of what happened. It changes it from negligence to something else," I said. "Yes," he said. I picked up my coffee mug. I held it. "How long does this take?" I said. "If we proceed formally." Title disputes of this kind with clear documentation on both sides, months, not years, he said. Especially if he's trying to sell. A pending title dispute will stall any sale immediately once it's filed. File it, I said. Fitch looked at me for a moment. You're sure? He's had 26 years, I said. File it. Sandra Reyes came into the picture on Wednesday of that week. She was in her 50s, compact and precise, with the particular quality of attention that the best technical attorneys have. She listened to everything and said very little until she was ready, and when she was ready she was very specific. She reviewed Whitmore's copies of the documents in Fitch's conference room while Fitch and I sat across from her. It took her 40 minutes, during which she made occasional notes on a yellow pad and asked 2 brief clarifying questions. When she finished she looked up. The restriction is valid, she said. It's clearly drafted, properly recorded, and has never been formally released. The 1998 transfer deed's failure to list it as an encumbrance is, at minimum, a significant error. At maximum, it represents a deliberate omission. She paused. I've seen this before. Not often, but I've seen it. Someone knows a restriction exists, they want it gone, they have the deed recorded without listing it and hope that future title searches miss it or that the beneficiary never finds out. Do future title searches miss it? I said. Sometimes, she said. If a searcher only goes back a certain number of years, or if the property has changed hands multiple times and the restriction gets buried in the chain. In this case, the property has only changed hands once, from your grandparents to your parents, so the chain is short. A thorough search would find it. Which means any title company handling the sale would find it, I said. Any competent one, she said. Yes. She reached into the folder she'd brought and took out a document, her own, freshly printed, several pages stapled together. She unfolded the cover page and laid it flat on the conference table and slid it toward me. This is a draft notice of beneficial interest claim, she said. It names you as the claimant, describes the 1971 restriction and its operative condition, and asserts your interest in the property. Once this is filed with the county and served on the current title holders, your parents, it creates a cloud on the title. Nothing can close until it's resolved. I looked at the document. My name at the top, the Folsom property address, the case number from the 1971 restriction. What does resolution look like? I said. Several possibilities, she said. Your parents could contest the claim, in which case it goes to a judge, and based on what I've read, I like your position. They could negotiate a settlement, pay you a sum representing your interest in exchange for a release. Or, she paused. They could simply acknowledge the interest and structure the sale to include you as a partial proceeds recipient. My father offered me $50,000, I said. Sandra Reyes looked at me with a very specific expression, not quite amusement, but in the same register. Based on the restriction language and the current property value, she said, your interest is conservatively in the range of $400,000 to $700,000, depending on how a court interprets the beneficial fraction. She paused. $50,000 is not a good faith offer. I said nothing. It's what someone offers, she said, when they believe the other party doesn't know what they have. The notice was filed on Friday. Service was effectuated the following Tuesday, a process server, my father's Folsom address, 11 in the morning. Fitch called me at 11:47 to confirm. He's been served, he said. Okay, I said. Sandra says to expect a call from his attorney within the week, he said. Possibly sooner. It was sooner. Thursday afternoon, 8 days after Saturday's kitchen conversation, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I answered it, and a man identified himself as my father's attorney and said he was calling to open a dialogue. I gave him Fitch's number and hung up. What I did not expect was that my father would call directly the same evening. Not a text this time. A call at 7:18 which I let go to voicemail. I listened to the voicemail standing in the kitchen, Colton beside me, the phone held between us so he could hear. My father's voice on the recording was different from the voice he'd used in the kitchen on Saturday. Saturday's voice had been controlled, low, deliberate, the voice of a man managing a negotiation. The voice on the voicemail was still controlled, but the control was working harder now. Underneath it something had changed in the frequency, a tightness that hadn't been there before. Presley, he said. I know you've filed something. I want you to understand that I'm not trying to be your enemy here. I'm your father. Whatever you think happened with the house, the situation is more complicated than it looks from where you're standing. I had counsel. I acted on counsel. That's not the same thing as what you seem to be accusing me of. A pause. Call me back. Please. We can still resolve this without making it into something it doesn't need to be. You were always the one who made things harder than they needed to be, Presley, and I know that's not what you want people to say about you. Call me. The recording ended. I lowered the phone. Colton was quiet for a moment. Then, third time he said it. Third time, I said. You were always the one who made things harder than they needed to be. I had counted every instance. I would keep counting. I set the phone face down on the counter and opened my laptop and composed an email to Fitch with the voicemail transcribed from memory, every word, as exactly as I could reproduce it. I noted the time of the call. I noted that my father had called directly rather than through counsel, after counsel had already made contact. Fitch responded within the hour, save the voicemail. Don't delete it. Don't call him back. Forward me the audio file. I did. The following Monday, Sandra Reyes requested the full title history from the county, not just the 1971 and 1998 documents, but everything recorded against the property across its entire chain. The poll came back Tuesday and Fitch sent me a copy with a cover note flagging 3 items he wanted to discuss. I read the title history that evening at the kitchen table. The first flagged item was a deed of trust recorded in 2019, a refinance, my parents' names, a bank I didn't recognize. That was expected. People refinanced. The second flagged item was a grant deed recorded in 2021, 2 years ago. I read the entry twice. It was a partial transfer. My parents had conveyed a 15% interest in the property to my sister Bo. I put the title history down on the table. Bo. I picked it up and read the entry again carefully to make sure I had understood it. A grant deed. 15%. Bo's full legal name, which I had not seen written in a formal document since she'd appeared on my grandmother's estate paperwork as a secondary beneficiary. She owned 15% of the Folsom house. I thought about her birthday party, the rooftop venue, the floral installation, the photo of my mother in a silver top. I thought about her phone call in late August before the wedding, 11 minutes, her voice warm and sisterly. I'm so sorry about all of this, I'm so happy for you. I thought about my father at the kitchen table. We thought $50,000 was the fair way to do it. As a gift. He had transferred 15% of a $2.1 million property to Bo 2 years ago. He had not mentioned this on Saturday. He had offered me $50,000 as a gift. The third flagged item was a listing agreement, not a county record, but a document Sandra's office had obtained separately through a real estate disclosure request. The Folsom house had been listed with a broker 4 weeks ago. The listing was active. The asking price was $2.3 million. Not 2.1. 2.3. I sat with the title history and the listing agreement in front of me and let myself be still for a moment. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Colton was in the other room. I could hear the low sound of something on television, the ordinary texture of an evening. I reached for my phone and took a photograph of the listing agreement, then another of the grant deed entry. I sent both to Fitch with a single line, look at items 2 and 3 together. His response came back 11 minutes later, I see it. Sandra needs to see this tonight. She's going to want to amend the filing. Then, 60 seconds after that, a second message, are you all right? I looked at the question for a moment. Then I typed back, yes. Tell Sandra to amend whatever she needs to amend. The listing agreement was still on the table in front of me. Reyes's office had sent it as a printed copy and I'd brought it home, and now I unfolded it fully and laid it flat so I could read the full document rather than just the first page. Page 3 had the broker's estimated net proceeds table, a standard document, the kind any listing agreement included, showing projected seller proceeds after commission and closing costs at various sale prices. At $2.3 million, after a standard 6% commission and estimated closing costs, the net to sellers was approximately $2,100,000. $2,100,000, to be divided among current title holders in proportion to their ownership interests. My parents held 85%. Bo held 15%. And somewhere on the original 1971 title, recorded and never released and very much still operative, was a clause that named me. I folded the listing agreement back along its creases and put it in the Whitmore envelope with the other documents. The envelope was getting thick now, the restriction, the transfer deed, my grandmother's letter, Sandra's draft notice, the title history, the listing agreement. A cascade that had started with a single manila folder in the back of a filing cabinet and had grown, document by document, into something my father was about to discover he could not sell his way around. My phone buzzed. Fitch again. Sandra is filing the amended notice tomorrow morning. It will name the grant deed to Beau as a potentially conflicting conveyance given your prior beneficial interest. Once it's filed, the listing broker will be notified. The sale will stop. I set the phone down. Outside, the Sacramento night was quiet and cool, the first real edge of winter in the air. I could smell it through the window I'd left cracked, the specific cold of valley nights in November, clean and flat and without apology. The broker called my father on Wednesday morning. I know this because Sandra's office had a contact at the title company the broker used, and the title company had flagged the amended notice immediately upon its filing. The broker, per standard practice, had notified the sellers that a title encumbrance had been identified that would prevent the sale from proceeding until resolved. My father called Fitch's office at 11:43 Wednesday morning. Not his own attorney. Fitch directly. Fitch called me at noon. He wants a meeting, Fitch said. In person. He says he wants to resolve this privately. When? I said. He suggested Friday, Fitch said. He wants it to be just family. No attorneys. No, I said. I told him that wasn't going to work, Fitch said. I've proposed a meeting at Sandra's office. Both parties with counsel. Friday afternoon. Did he agree? His attorney called back within the hour, Fitch said. They agreed. What changed? I said. He was ready to fight this on Saturday. Saturday, Fitch said carefully. He thought you had Whitmore's copies and a letter. He didn't know about the title history poll. He didn't know Sandra had the listing agreement. A pause. He also didn't know we'd flagged the grant deed to your sister. That one, I think, surprised him. I thought about that. He thought I didn't know about Beau, I said. I think, Fitch said, he thought there were several things you didn't know. Friday will be the first time he understands the full picture of what you have. I looked out the window of the firm, the afternoon light falling flat and gold across the East Sacramento rooftops, the same light that had been there the day my father's first text arrived. 8 months of distance collapsed into a single week of documents. Friday, I said. Friday, he said. Sandra's office. 2 o'clock. I hung up and went back to the punch list I'd been reviewing and finished it in 40 minutes with the particular focus of someone who has decided that the ordinary work of the day deserves to be done properly, regardless of what else is happening. Friday came. Sandra's conference room was on the 4th floor of a building near downtown Sacramento, with windows that faced west and caught the afternoon light in long horizontal bands. There was a long table, 6 chairs, a credenza with a water pitcher and glasses. Sandra sat at the head. Fitch sat to my left. I sat beside Fitch. My father arrived with his attorney, a man named Garrett, 50s, a partner at a firm in Folsom that handled real estate and estate matters. My father sat across from me. Garrett sat beside him. My mother had not come. Beau had not come. My father looked at me when he sat down and I looked back at him and neither of us said anything. Sandra opened the meeting. She was precise and unhurried the way she always was. She laid out the position, the 1971 restriction, its operative condition, the 1998 transfer deed's failure to carry it forward, the voicemail. She did not editorialize. She stated facts and cited document numbers and let the documents do what documents do when they are clear and numerous and organized by someone who knows how to use them. Garrett listened. He made notes. He asked 2 clarifying questions about the restriction language. Sandra answered both. My father across the table was very still. When Sandra finished, Garrett leaned over and said something quietly to my father, and my father nodded once and Garrett looked up. My client would like to address his daughter directly, Garrett said. Sandra glanced at me. I nodded. My father looked across the table at me. His hands were flat on the table, the same gesture as Saturday, the same posture of a man calling a meeting to order. But something in the set of his face had changed. The control was still there, but it was thinner now, and underneath it the structure of the thing he'd been managing for 26 years was visible the way a foundation is visible when the house above it has been removed. I made decisions, he said. I made decisions a long time ago that I believed were in the best interest of this family. I want you to know that. I said nothing. I acted on legal advice, he said. I was told the restriction was. Mr. Vance, Sandra said quietly, and Garrett put a hand briefly on his arm. He stopped. He looked at me for a moment longer and I looked back at him, and then he looked down at the table. Garrett opened his briefcase and reached in and took out a folder. He unfolded the cover page and laid it flat on the table and slid it across to Sandra. Our client would like to discuss the parameters of a settlement, he said. Sandra picked up the folder and read the first page without expression. Then she slid it to Fitch. Fitch read it and set it down and slid it to me. I looked at the number at the top of the page. It was not $50,000. It was not the conservative low end of Sandra's range. My father's attorney had written in the clean numerical language of a settlement offer, a figure that sat in the middle of what Sandra had told me my interest was worth, and beside it a clause, full conveyance of beneficial interest claim upon receipt, executed release of all further claims against the property or its proceeds. I read it twice. I set it down. I looked across the table at my father. His face, when he looked back at me, had the expression of a man who has finally understood the full dimensions of something he thought he'd managed, who has sat in a room and watched document after document emerge from a filing he didn't know existed, and has recognized in the specific and irreversible way of that kind of recognition, that the thing he thought he'd buried in 1998 had not stayed buried. He looked, for the first time in my memory, genuinely uncertain. Not sorry. Not yet. But uncertain, which was, I thought, a beginning. I picked up my water glass and held it. Sandra looked at me. Fitch looked at me. I looked at the settlement figure on the page and then at my father, and then I said, quietly and without any particular emphasis, "We'll need to discuss this." Sandra called a recess. 20 minutes, she said, standard practice when a settlement figure entered the room for the first time. Both parties to caucus separately, review numbers, return with instructions. Garrett nodded. My father pushed back his chair and followed his attorney out of the conference room and into the hallway, and the door closed behind them, and it was just Sandra and Fitch and me in the room with the afternoon light coming through the west-facing windows. Sandra poured water into her glass and set the pitcher down and looked at me. "Talk to me," she said. I looked at the settlement figure on the page. I'd been looking at it since Garrett slid it across the table, turning the number over in my mind the way you turn a stone, feeling its weight, its edges, whether it was what it appeared to be. "It's real," I said. "He's not lowballing anymore." "No," she said. "He's not." "Why?" I said. "What changed between Saturday and today?" Fitch answered that one. "The listing agreement," he said. The moment the broker called and told him the sale was stalled, the math became very concrete. He's not abstract about money. He's been planning this sale. He knows exactly what $2.3 million minus a stalled title dispute costs him, in time, in carrying costs, in the possibility that the market shifts while a cloud sits on the title. He paused. "And the grant deed to Beau." When Garrett saw that we had that we knew about Beau's 15% and could argue it was a conflicting conveyance against a prior beneficial interest, that changed the exposure calculation significantly. "He tried to shore up Beau's position," Sandra said, "before coming to you. That's what the 2021 grant deed was. He was protecting what he could protect." She looked at the settlement page. "He didn't expect you to find it." I thought about Beau. About the 11-minute phone call, the birthday party, the photograph at 11:30 at night. About whether she knew. Whether she'd been told. Whether the 15% grant deed was something that had been explained to her, or something she'd simply received the way you receive things from a parent who manages everything and explains nothing. I didn't know. I would have to find out. But not today. "Is the number enough?" I asked Sandra. She looked at me directly. "It's within the range I described to you," she said. "It's not the high end. It's not the low end. It's the number of a man who wants this over and believes he's still getting the better of the deal." She paused. "Whether it's enough is a question only you can answer." I looked at the page for a moment longer. Then I looked up at Fitch. "What would it look like to counter?" I said. "You could push for the high end," he said. "You have the documentation to support it. The risk is that he digs in, the dispute extends, the sale stays stalled." He paused. "Or you counter with one condition instead of a higher number." "What condition?" I said. The grant deed to Bo, he said. It was recorded in 2021. If a court determined that it conflicted with your prior beneficial interest, it could be unwound. You could ask that as part of the settlement, his conveyance to Bo be restructured, that whatever proceeds she receives come from his share, not as a separate interest that reduces the pool. I thought about that. That takes money out of his pocket, I said. Not hers. Correct, he said. She keeps her 15% of the proceeds. He funds it from his share rather than having it come off the top. I was quiet for a moment. Do it, I said. That's the counter. The number as offered plus Bo's 15% comes from his share, not the aggregate pool. Sandra made a note. Fitch made a note. We sat in the afternoon light for another few minutes, the water pitcher sweating lightly on the credenza, the city outside the window going about its ordinary business. When my father and Garrett returned, Garrett looked at Sandra with the expression of a man prepared for a longer afternoon. Sandra presented the counter in 2 sentences. Garrett looked at my father. My father was looking at me. I looked back at him and kept my face level and didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that the documents hadn't already said more clearly. Garrett leaned in and said something to my father quietly. My father's jaw tightened. He looked down at the table for a long moment, and I could see him doing the arithmetic, could see the shape of it move across his face, the calculation of what this cost him specifically and what it preserved. He looked up. He gave Garrett a single nod. Accepted, Garrett said. The settlement agreement took 3 weeks to finalize, language negotiated, reviewed, revised, signed. The title cloud was removed. The sale proceeded. The Folsom House closed escrow on a Thursday in December, 51 days after the meeting in Sandra's conference room. I know it was a Thursday because Fitch called me at 4 in the afternoon while I was at my desk at the firm, and I remember thinking that things in my life had a habit of happening on Thursdays, which was either meaningful or wasn't. It's done, he said. The wire transfer will clear by end of business tomorrow. I thanked him. I put the phone down. I went back to the materials order I'd been reviewing and finished it. When I got home, Colton had made dinner, nothing elaborate, pasta and a salad, the kind of dinner that was about being home rather than about the food. We ate at the kitchen table and I told him it had closed and he raised his water glass and said, "To Lorraine," and I raised mine and said, "To Lorraine," and we touched glasses. I thought about my grandmother in her small house in Carmichael, on the screened porch in the July heat, setting the small envelope on the table between us. I wanted you to know this exists. I thought about her in 1998, looking at the transfer deed and seeing what was missing and going to Whitmore with a copy. I thought about her making the photograph, printing it on plain paper, sealing it in an envelope with my name on it, and finding a way to make sure it reached me even after she was gone. She had done all of that. She had done it quietly over decades, without telling me because she didn't want to make it into a conflict I'd have to carry while she was still alive. She'd trusted that I would find it when I needed to find it. I wished I could tell her it worked. The wire cleared Friday morning. The number in my account when I checked it was real and specific and nothing like $50,000. I sat with it for a moment, not in triumph, not in relief exactly, but in the particular stillness of someone who has been in a long corridor and has finally stepped into a room. The room was different from the corridor. It was going to take some getting used to. I transferred a portion to a separate account that afternoon. Not the full amount, just a portion, enough to begin thinking about what it might become. I would talk to a financial advisor in January. I had time. I called Bo on a Sunday 2 weeks after the closing. It was the call I'd been thinking about since I'd seen the grant deed, the 15%, her name on the title, the question of what she knew and when. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey," she said, and her voice had the particular quality of someone who has been expecting a call and has rehearsed a version of how it might go. "I'm not calling to fight," I said. "I know," she said. Then, I didn't know what Dad had done. With the restriction. With any of it. I want you to know that. "Did you know about the grant deed?" I said. "The 15%? A pause. "He told me it was a tax planning thing," she said. "He said it was standard. He said he was going to do the same for you eventually." I let that sit for a moment without answering it. "Bo," I said. "I know," she said. Her voice had dropped, not guilty exactly, but not comfortable either. "I know how it looks. Do you know that the settlement required his share to fund your portion?" I said. "That you still have your 15%. That it came out of what he received, not out of mine. A long pause. I didn't know how it was structured, she said. I made sure it worked that way, I said. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear her breathing, steady, trying to stay steady. Why? She said. Because it wasn't your fault, I said. What he set up. What he didn't tell either of us. I paused. That doesn't mean everything is fine, Beau. I want you to understand that. The wedding. I know, she said. I'm not there yet, I said. With all of it. I don't know when I will be. Okay, she said. Her voice was quiet. There was something in it, not quite regret, but something that lived nearby. I just didn't want you to think I'd been trying to take something from you, I said. I wasn't. I was trying to take back something that was always mine. She said she understood. We talked for a few minutes more, careful, surface level, the conversation of two people who share a history and are deciding, slowly, how much of the future to share as well. It wasn't warm. It wasn't cold. It was the temperature of something that might in time become something else or might not. We said goodbye. I hung up and stood at the kitchen window for a while. My father did not call after the settlement. His attorney sent the signed documents through Fitch's office, and the wire transferred, and that was the extent of the communication. I did not call him either. I thought about the voicemail sometimes, the recording I'd saved and sent to Fitch and still had on my phone, had never deleted. I'd listened to it exactly twice, once the night I received it, once the morning of the Friday meeting, to make sure I remembered every word accurately. You were always the one who made things harder than they needed to be, Presley. 3 times he'd said it. Saturday at the kitchen table, looking across at me and believing he was closing a door. Standing on the threshold of the same house, saying it again to himself, to the air, to whatever he believed I couldn't withstand. And then the voicemail, his voice working harder to stay even, the control thinner, the words identical, as though in the repetition he might find the power the first 2 instances hadn't delivered. What he'd meant, I think, was that I was difficult. That my refusal to accept his version of events made me an obstacle rather than a daughter. That the right thing, the easy thing, the family thing was to fold. What he hadn't understood was that the difficulty wasn't in me. It was in the documents. My grandmother had made things very clear. She had made them clear in 1971 and then again in 1998 and then again in the spare room of her Carmichael house on a July afternoon, and then again in the letter Whitmore had kept for 4 years, and then again in the small envelope that had found its way to the back of my filing cabinet like a letter that knew where it was going even before the address had been written. She had made things clear so that when the moment came, I wouldn't have to make them clear myself. I would only have to be the person who showed up and said, I know what this is. That wasn't making things harder. That was the opposite. January arrived. Sacramento in January has a cold, specific quality, not severe, not dramatic, but honest, the city stripped of its summer haze and standing in its own plain light. I started running again, something I'd let go during the fall, and in the mornings before work I would go out into the cold and run the grid streets of Midtown and think about very little, which was a relief. Colton and I talked in January about what came next. The settlement money changed certain calculations, not everything but certain things. We talked about whether to buy rather than rent. We talked about a trip we'd been postponing for 2 years. We talked about the future in the way of people who have more room than they did before, which is a conversation with a different quality than the one you have when you're measuring everything twice. One evening in late January I took the small envelope out of the filing cabinet, the one with my grandmother's handwriting, my name in her careful slanted print, and looked at it for a while. The envelope itself was empty now. Everything that had been in it had been copied, filed, submitted, recorded. The documents had done what documents do when they're given the chance. I kept the envelope anyway. I put it back in the filing cabinet, not behind the estate folder but in front of it, where I'd see it when I opened the drawer. I thought about what she'd said on the screened porch. Your father is a man who believes that what he holds in his hands belongs to him permanently. I want you to know that some things have conditions attached. She'd been right. She'd been right about all of it. I closed the filing cabinet drawer. Some things I know now that I didn't know when this started. 1. A document filed in 1971 by 2 people who wanted to make sure things went the right way eventually can still be operative 50 years later, if it was drafted clearly and recorded properly and never formally released. The law has a long memory for things that were done right. 2. When someone tells you that you make things harder than they need to be, it's worth asking, harder for whom? Difficulty in a family is sometimes the name one person gives to the moment another person stops being convenient. 3. My grandmother did not leave me money. She left me documentation, which turned out to be the same thing eventually, but more than that, it was proof that she had seen what was happening and had refused to let it stand, even from a distance, even across decades, even from beyond her own death. That is not a small thing to inherit. This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real emotional truths many families carry. If this reminded you of your own family, of a promise that was kept in secret, or a document that changed everything, or a parent who believed what was theirs forever, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe. There's always another story coming, and it's usually the one you didn't expect.